The snow falls silently on the barbed wire, each flake catching the pale December light before settling into the geometric patterns of captivity. Through frost-etched windows, men in faded Wehrmacht uniforms press their faces against the glass, their breath creating temporary clouds that obscure their view of something they never expected to see in America: Christmas lights twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars. These are not the America they were taught to expect. The propaganda had painted pictures of a nation consumed by industrial coldness, a place where compassion was weakness and humanity was currency. Yet here, in this remote corner of small-town America, the gentle sound of church bells carries across the December air, mixing with the distant voices of children singing carols, the same melodies these German prisoners once heard echoing through the bombed cathedrals of their homeland. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber stands at the window of Barrack 7, his calloused fingers tracing the frost patterns that remind him of the Edelweiss flowers that once grew wild in the Bavarian mountains. He has been here 8 months now, long enough to recognize the rhythms of this strange place: the morning whistle, the clatter of work details heading to nearby farms, the evening return when exhausted men collapse onto their narrow bunks with stories of American farmers who shared their lunch and spoke broken German with surprising kindness. But this is different. This is Christmas approaching in a land that should be his enemy, yet somehow feels less hostile than the trenches of Normandy or the frozen hell of the Eastern Front. The irony cuts deep. These men who once marched under swastikas now find themselves witnesses to a celebration of peace and goodwill, hosted by the very people they were trained to destroy. The camp commandant, Colonel James Harrison, walks his evening rounds with the measured pace of a man carrying invisible weight. His own son died at Anzio 6 months ago, yet here he stands, responsible for the welfare of men who wore the same uniform as those who killed his boy. The contradiction should drive him mad, yet something in the approaching holiday season, perhaps the memory of his son's last letter about the German prisoner who helped wounded Americans, stays his bitterness. In the distance, the lights of the town flicker like hope itself. Children are sledding down Peterson's Hill, their laughter carrying on the wind. Their fathers are overseas, fighting these very men's comrades, yet their mothers allow them this joy, this normalcy in a world gone mad with war. The stage is set for something unprecedented, a collision between hatred and humanity, between the machinery of war and the simple magic of Christmas. What happens next will challenge everything these prisoners believe about their captors, and everything their captors believe about the nature of their enemies. The Geneva Convention of 1929 reads like a bureaucrat's attempt to civilize the uncivilizable, war itself. Yet here in America, these dry legal paragraphs have transformed into a sprawling network of over 400 prisoner-of-war camps scattered across a continent that has never known occupation, never felt the boot of foreign armies on its soil. Camp Concordia sits on 640 acres of Kansas wheat country, its orderly rows of barracks and administrative buildings rising from the prairie like a temporary city built for temporary residents. But there is nothing temporary about the careful attention to detail: the camp hospital staffed with American doctors, the mess halls serving portions that would make a GI envious, the library stocked with German literature that hasn't been banned or burned. This is not mere compliance with international law. This is something more complex, more unsettling to both captors and captives. The United States finds itself hosting 425,000 enemy prisoners by war's end, more than any nation in history. They become an inadvertent army of laborers, filling the gaps left by American boys shipped overseas, harvesting crops in Nebraska, cutting timber in Oregon, working in factories from Michigan to Texas. The mathematics of captivity reveal their own strange logic. It costs the War Department 2,050 sounds per day to house, feed, and guard each prisoner, yet their labor generates $300 in value. The enemy becomes, quite literally, a profitable venture. German engineers design irrigation systems for Colorado farms. Former U-boat commanders organize efficient work details that surpass the productivity of civilian crews. The irony writes itself. America's enemies helping to fuel the war machine that fights their homeland. In the town of Concordia, population 4,800, the arrival of 4,000 German prisoners creates an economic revolution disguised as military necessity. Local farmers, initially suspicious and resentful, discover that these former soldiers work with Teutonic precision, never complaining about dawn-to-dusk shifts in the wheat fields. Hardware store owner Henry Mills finds himself selling German-English dictionaries faster than he can order them. The Concordia Methodist Church begins offering German lessons to local women whose husbands guard the camp. But beneath this practical cooperation lurks a deeper current of confusion and guilt. How do you hate men who help your neighbor bring in his harvest? How do you maintain the necessary distance from enemies who share photographs of their own children during lunch breaks? The clean lines of wartime morality become blurred in the dust of Kansas wheat fields. Mayor Robert Thompson walks Main Street each evening, watching German work details return to camp as American families sit on their porches, waving to men who wear the same uniform as those who killed their sons and husbands overseas. The cognitive dissonance should tear the community apart, yet somehow it doesn't. Instead, it creates something unprecedented, a laboratory for testing whether humanity can survive the acid of total war. The machinery of captivity has created an accidental experiment in coexistence, and Christmas 1944 approaches like a test that no one designed, but everyone must somehow pass. The ration books tell their own story: coffee reduced to £1 every 5 weeks, sugar scarce enough that mothers save every grain for Christmas cookies they can barely afford to make. Yet in living rooms across America, families gather around Christmas trees decorated with tinsel made from recycled aluminum foil, their gifts wrapped in brown paper saved from grocery bags and decorated with hand-drawn holly leaves. Bing Crosby's White Christmas crackles through radio speakers in 10 million homes, his voice carrying the weight of national longing for boys who won't be home for the holidays. The song becomes an anthem of absence, each note a reminder that this Christmas, like the last two, belongs to empty chairs and carefully preserved traditions. In Concordia, Kansas, Sarah Mitchell adjusts the blackout curtains in her kitchen window and counts the money in her coffee tin, $23.47, saved from her job at the munitions plant, enough for small gifts for her 3 children and maybe a few extra items for the church charity drive. Her husband Tom died at Guadalcanal 18 months ago, yet she continues the Christmas rituals with fierce determination, as if maintaining normalcy might somehow make sense of the senseless. The scrap drives have stripped the town of anything metallic. Old pots, car bumpers, even children's toys melted down and shipped east to become bombers and bullets. Yet Christmas endures in defiant simplicity. Children make decorations from construction paper and paste. Mothers darn stockings one more time and hang them with the faith of believers. The Woolworths 5 and dime creates window displays from whatever inventory they can scrape together. Tin soldiers, wooden puzzles, and cloth dolls that cost more than they should, but mean everything to families grasping for joy. The Christmas pageant at Concordia Elementary School proceeds despite having more shepherds than wise men because half the boys are playing soldiers instead of biblical figures. 6-year-old Mary Catherine Harrison, daughter of the camp commandant, insists on being an angel because her daddy told her angels watch over everyone, even the sad men behind the fence at the edge of town. At the Grand Theatre, Going My Way plays to packed houses, Bing Crosby again providing the soundtrack to American resilience. Between features, newsreels show the latest from Europe: liberation of concentration camps, battles in the Ardennes, B-17s dropping their deadly cargo on German cities. The audience watches in silence, processing the reality that somewhere in that distant carnage, their own boys are dying while German prisoners sleep safely in Kansas barracks. This is the paradox of the American Christmas of 1944, a celebration of peace and goodwill hosted by a nation committed to total war, a festival of giving observed by communities that have already given their most precious possessions to a conflict that seems to have no end. And in that paradox, something unexpected is about to bloom. The idea begins where most dangerous thoughts do, in the mind of a child asking an uncomfortable question. 8-year-old Tommy Watson, son of the town banker, tugs on his mother's sleeve during Sunday service and whispers loud enough for 3 pews to hear, "Mama, why don't the German soldiers get any Christmas presents?" Eleanor Watson feels every eye in the sanctuary turn toward her, feels the weight of their judgment and curiosity. Reverend Matthews pauses mid-sermon, his words about Christian charity suddenly hanging in the air with unexpected relevance. The question spreads through the congregation like ripples in still water. Why don't they? After service, the conversation continues in hushed clusters on the church steps. Margaret Foster, the 3rd-grade teacher, mentions how her students have been asking similar questions since the prisoners started working at Thompson's farm. They see them every day on the way to school, she explains, her breath visible in the December air. Yesterday, little Susan asked if German children believe in Santa Claus too. The suggestion comes from Helen Morrison, the pastor's wife, spoken so quietly that others must lean in to hear. What if the children made something simple, nothing elaborate, just small tokens, cards perhaps, or… She doesn't finish the sentence, but the idea takes root in the silence that follows. Ruth Henderson, whose son was killed at Normandy, speaks first. "Those men killed our boys." Her voice carries no anger, only exhaustion. How can we give them gifts when our own children won't receive presents from their fathers this Christmas? But Dorothy Palmer, mother of 4 and organizer of every church social for the past decade, surprises everyone. Maybe that's exactly why we should. She adjusts her worn gloves, choosing her words carefully. My Johnny's been gone 8 months. These prisoners, they're somebody's children too. Somebody's Johnny. The debate shifts to the church basement, voices rising and falling like ocean tides. Some call it treason disguised as charity. Others invoke the teachings of Christ about loving one's enemies. The children, dismissed to play in the snow outside, remain oblivious to the moral revolution their simple question has triggered. By the time families walk home through the gathering dusk, the decision has been made, not officially, not unanimously, but inevitably. The Sunday school classes will make gifts, small things, simple things, tokens of a humanity that refuses to be extinguished by headlines and hatred. What none of them realize is that their whispered conspiracy is about to challenge everything: German propaganda about American brutality, American assumptions about German inhumanity, and the very nature of Christmas itself. Christmas Eve, 1944. The snow falls in fat, lazy flakes that catch the light from the camp's perimeter lamps, transforming the barbed wire into something almost beautiful. A crystalline web separating 2 worlds that are about to discover they might not be so different after all. At 6:47 p.m., just as the mess hall dinner concludes and the prisoners settle into their evening routines, an unusual procession approaches the main gate. 23 children from Concordia, bundled in hand-me-down coats and mittens knitted by grandmothers, carry small packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with whatever ribbon their mothers could spare. Private Billy Martinez, barely 19 and homesick for his family's Christmas celebration in San Antonio, watches through the guard tower as the children approach. His orders are clear: no unauthorized contact with prisoners, but nothing in the manual prepared him for this moment. He radios Sergeant Johnson, who radios Lieutenant Brooks, who makes the decision that will echo through decades of military protocol. Let them approach the fence, but keep watch. Inside Barrack 12, Unteroffizier Fritz Köhler is writing his weekly letter to his wife Anna when the singing begins. At first he mistakes it for the radio in the guards station, but the voices are too young, too pure. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht. Silent Night, Holy Night, sung in accented German by children who learned the words from their school teacher's phonetic writing on the blackboard. The effect is electric. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Card games are abandoned. Men who have survived Stalingrad and Monte Cassino find themselves moving toward the windows like sleepwalkers drawn by a sound that should not exist in this place, at this time, sung by these voices. Klaus Weber, the Bavarian who has stood at these windows for 8 months, becomes the first to approach the fancy. Through the wire, a girl no older than his own daughter offers a small package, her mittened hands shaking, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what she's doing. Fröhliche Weihnachten, she whispers, the German phrase carefully rehearsed. Merry Christmas. Inside the package, 3 peppermint sticks, a hand-drawn card showing Santa Claus and a Christmas tree, and a note written in careful cursive. I hope you get to see your family soon. Love, Mary Catherine, age 6. Klaus stares at the card until his vision blurs. The little girl has drawn him with a smile. The dam breaks. More prisoners emerge from their barracks, drawn by reports that spread through the compound like wildfire. American children are giving them gifts. American children are singing German Christmas carols. American children are treating them like human beings instead of monsters. Some prisoners refuse to approach, suspicious of American tricks or German shame, but others, like Hans Müller, former U-boat radio man, and Georg Steiner, tank driver from the Afrika Korps, find themselves accepting small tokens from small hands extended through wire that suddenly seems less like a barrier and more like a bridge. The children's choir grows bolder, their voices carrying across the Kansas prairie. O Tannenbaum, wie treu sind deine Blätter. O Christmas tree, how faithful are your branches. Standing in the observation post, Colonel Harrison watches through binoculars as hardened Wehrmacht veterans wipe their eyes with the backs of their hands. His own vision blurs as he remembers his son's last letter. Dad, maybe when this war ends, we'll remember that we're all somebody's children. The gifts themselves tell stories more powerful than any propaganda poster. Sergeant Otto Brenner, veteran of 3 years on the Russian front, unwraps a small wooden cross carved by 10-year-old Jimmy Patterson from a piece of scrap lumber. The boy's note explains that his father, currently fighting in the Philippines, taught him that God watches over all soldiers, even the ones on the other side. Otto has not prayed since Kursk, has not believed in divine mercy since watching his regiment disappear in the frozen hell of Stalingrad's rubble. Yet he finds himself clutching this crude wooden cross, carved by enemy hands that show more compassion than his own commanders ever did. In Barrack 4, Corporal Heinrich Müller sits on his bunk, staring at a crayon drawing that depicts 2 stick figures, one labelled German soldier, one labelled American boy, holding hands under a rainbow. The artist, 8-year-old Patricia Coleman, has written on the back, "My daddy says you're far from home like he is. I hope you both come home safe." Heinrich's own son would be 9 now if the bombing of Dresden left anything of their neighbourhood standing. He has not heard from his family since October, has no way of knowing if young Stefan still believes in Christmas morning miracles or if he even survived to see another December. Yet here, in the hands of a Kansas child, he finds the faith he thought the war had killed. The most profound transformation occurs in Werner Hoffmann, former SS Panzergrenadier, whose Iron Cross and battle scars mark him as a true believer in the Reich's promise of Aryan supremacy. He accepts a knitted scarf from 12-year-old Rebecca Stone, whose Jewish grandparents fled Germany in 1938. The irony is lost on neither of them. She knows his uniform's history, he recognizes her name's heritage. Yet her note simply states, "Stay warm. My grandmother says kind. Ness is the only thing that survives war." Werner stares at the scarf for 3 hours, turning it over in his hands as if it might reveal the secret of how a Jewish child can offer comfort to a man trained to consider her subhuman. Everything he believed about racial superiority crumbles like paper in rain. If the master race is superior, why is this child teaching him about humanity? These individual revelations multiply across the compound. Letters and diaries recovered decades later reveal the psychological earthquake that Christmas Eve created. Private journals describe grown men weeping over candy canes, hardened soldiers questioning everything they believed about American barbarism and German righteousness. Hans Kruger, former Luftwaffe pilot, writes to his brother in a letter intercepted by censors but preserved in military archives. They sing the same songs we learned as children. Their mothers worry about them like ours do. Their children play the same games. How did we convince ourselves they were monsters when they are mirrors of ourselves? The gifts become talismans, carried through the remaining months of captivity and treasured long after repatriation. Some prisoners will keep these tokens for the rest of their lives, pulling them from bureau drawers decades later to show grandchildren the night American children taught them about the Christmas truce that official history never recorded. The story doesn't end when the snow melts in Kansas. It follows the prisoners home to a Germany that barely resembles the nation they left behind. Cities reduced to rubble, families scattered like dust, children who have forgotten what peacetime Christmas looks like. In the ruins of Hamburg, Klaus Weber searches for 6 weeks before finding his wife and daughter living in a bombed-out basement with 14 other families. When he shows them Mary Catherine's drawing, when he tells them about the American children who sang German carols through barbed wire, his 8-year-old daughter Greta asks the question that will reshape his future. "Papa, can we go live there someday?" 3 years later, Klaus Weber steps off a ship in New York Harbor, one of thousands of former POWs who choose to return to America as immigrants rather than remain in Europe's devastation. He carries 2 suitcases and Mary Catherine's hand-drawn Christmas card, now carefully preserved between sheets of glass. His first letter is addressed to Concordia, Kansas, seeking the girl who taught him that kindness could cross any boundary. The reunion photograph, published in Look magazine in 1949, shows Klaus Weber and Mary Catherine Harrison, now 11 years old and proud of her pen pal from Germany, standing together in front of the same fence that once divided them. The barbed wire is gone, replaced by a memorial garden where former prisoners and local families plant flowers together each spring. Georg Steiner returns to Austria to find his parents dead and his family farm claimed by Soviet forces. He rebuilds his life slowly, becoming a teacher in a small alpine village where he tells his students about the American children who gave gifts to enemy soldiers. His Christmas lesson becomes legendary: how hate dissolves when you look into the eyes of a child who sees you as human. Some stories carry care weight. Werner Hoffmann, the former SS soldier transformed by Rebecca Stone's knitted scarf, discovers that her grandparents died in Dachau while he was learning about kindness in Kansas. The knowledge drives him to dedicate his post-war life to Holocaust education, his testimony about the power of individual compassion becoming required reading in German schools. By 1955, over 40 former Concordia prisoners have immigrated to America. They form an unofficial network, attending each other's weddings, naming children after their American friends, building careers in the country they once fought against. The Concordia Chamber of Commerce notes, with quiet pride, that the town's population includes more former German soldiers than most German towns. The ripple effect continues across generations. Children of former POWs attend American universities. Grandchildren serve in the same military that once guarded their grandfathers. The Christmas gifts of 1944 become family heirlooms, passed down with stories that prove humanity's capacity to survive its own worst impulses. Today, the camp at Concordia exists only in memory and museum exhibits. The barracks have long since been demolished, the guard towers reduced to concrete foundations slowly disappearing under Kansas prairie grass. Yet the story endures, preserved in letters, photographs, and the testimonies of those who witnessed something unprecedented, the moment when war paused for wonder. The children who offered those gifts through the fence grew up to become teachers, farmers, business leaders, and parents who passed the story to their own children. Mary Catherine Harrison became Mary Catherine Weber, marrying the German prisoner she first met as a 6-year-old, offering peppermint sticks through barbed wire. Their wedding in 1965 made headlines across America as a symbol of reconciliation and proof that some boundaries exist only in our minds. The museum in Concordia displays artifacts that seem impossibly fragile to have survived such momentous times. The wooden cross carved by Jimmy Patterson, now donated by Otto Brenner's family. Rebecca Stone's knitted scarf, preserved by Werner Hoffmann until his death in 1987. The original crayon drawing by Patricia Coleman, still vivid in primary colours that refuse to fade. But perhaps the most powerful exhibit is the simplest, a recording made in 1994, the 50th anniversary of that Christmas Eve. Elderly voices, some speaking in German accents, others in Kansas drawls, recount the night when children's gifts shattered the psychology of war. Heinrich Müller, now 89, speaks slowly into the microphone. "I learned that night that Christmas is not about victory or defeat. It is about remembering that we are all somebody's children, all somebody's beloved." The lesson resonates beyond that single moment in December 1944. In every conflict since, similar stories emerge, small acts of humanity that pierce through propaganda and hatred. American soldiers sharing chocolate with Vietnamese children, British medics treating Argentine wounded in the Falklands, Israeli and Palestinian children attending the same peace camps. These moments remind us that war's greatest casualty is not life, but the illusion that our enemies are fundamentally different from ourselves. The German prisoners at Concordia learned that Americans could show mercy to those who killed their sons. The American children learned that enemy soldiers missed their families and cried over handmade gifts. The Christmas Eve of 1944 at Camp Concordia becomes more than historical curiosity. It becomes proof of concept. Evidence that even in humanity's darkest chapters, light persists in the simple recognition that suffering is universal, that love transcends nationality, that children possess a wisdom that adults often lose in their rush toward judgment. As the sun sets over the Kansas prairie where barracks once stood, where carols once carried across barbed wire, where enemy hands once accepted gifts from innocent hearts, the lesson echoes across decades. In a world consumed by the machinery of hatred, sometimes the smallest gesture carries the greatest power to heal. The children of Concordia understood what their leaders forgot, that Christmas is not about choosing sides, but about choosing hope. And in that choice, they wrote a chapter of World War II that no military historian could have predicted, but every human heart can understand.